When I was just 13 years old, I learned the hard way that sometimes the very people who should protect you the most are the ones who end up becoming your worst nightmare. My name is Annie Miller, though most folks simply call me Grandma Ann. I'm 73 now, and I was born in a small town called Fairview, nestled in the outskirts of Philadelphia in 1952. Today, I'm finally ready to share a story I've kept buried in my heart for more than 6 decades, something I've never even told my own children. So if you're here listening, please take a moment to like this video and hit that subscribe button because your support means the world to me. It gives me the strength to talk about these and let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to get to know you. Well, my story starts back in 1965 when I was 13. We were a modest family living in a little 3-bedroom house in Fairview. My father, Robert, worked as a long-haul trucker crisscrossing Pennsylvania with his deliveries. He'd be gone for days, sometimes even weeks. My mother, Connie, was a seamstress, ironing and sewing clothes for the well-to-do ladies in town. Our backyard always seemed to be a maze of laundry lines, white sheets fluttering like ghosts in the breeze. I was the youngest of 4, the only girl after 2 older brothers, Ray, who was 19, and Max, who was 15. In my father's eyes, having a daughter after 2 boys was like a gift from heaven. He called me his little princess, always had a piece of candy tucked in his shirt pocket just for me when he came home. He carried me in his arms until I was 11, even though I was getting too big, because to him, I'd always be his baby girl. When Dad was home, I felt invincible, like no harm could ever touch me. But the older I got, the less he seemed to be around. His routes got longer, and the places he delivered to were farther away. Sometimes he'd be on the road for nearly 3 weeks at a time. It was during one of those long absences that everything changed. It was a humid March afternoon. Spring hadn't quite arrived in Pennsylvania. Mom had left to drop off some clothes to a customer, leaving me at home with my brothers. "Look after the house, Annie," she told me before heading out. "Your brothers are here, so ask them if you need anything." I was at the kitchen sink washing the lunch dishes when I felt someone standing behind me. It was Ray, the eldest. He moved in closer than he ever had before. "Annie," he murmured, his voice unfamiliar and unsettling. "You're growing up so fast." A chill crawled down my spine. I tried to edge away, but he gripped my arm. "What are you doing, Ray?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Let me go. I'm trying to finish the dishes." That's when Max walked into the kitchen. For a moment, I thought he'd step in to stop Ray, to defend me, but the smirk on his face made my stomach twist. It was clear they'd planned this. I felt it deep in my bones. "Mom won't be back until dinner," Max said, leaning against the door frame, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. Nobody's going to know. What happened in that kitchen that afternoon still makes me sick to my stomach even now. They were my brothers, my own flesh and blood. They were supposed to be my protectors, my allies, but that day they turned into monsters. Together they treated me like I was nothing more than an object, something to be used, not their sister. When it was finally over, Max, only 15, looked at me with a coldness I can't forget. "If you ever tell anyone," he sneered, "no one will believe you. They'll say you wanted it." I lay on that kitchen floor long after they'd gone, unable to move, unable to stop the tears. When I finally found the strength to get up, I stumbled to the bathroom. I scrubbed my skin raw, trying to wash away what had happened. But no matter how hard I scrubbed, I couldn't make it go away. When Mom got home, pretending everything was fine was the hardest thing I'd ever done. "Is everything all right, Annie?" she asked, eyeing my tear-stained face. "Yeah, Mom, just a bit of a headache." That night, I barricaded myself in my bedroom, shoving the dresser against the door. But it didn't make a difference. The next morning, while my mother ran errands at the local farmer's market, they came back. Ray shoved the door open so hard that the dresser toppled over. "You can't hide in there forever, you know," he sneered with Max trailing behind. "This is our house, too." And just like that, my nightmare began all over again. Every time Mom left the house, every time Dad's rig rumbled out of town, it felt like a death sentence. They took turns. One would guard the hallway while the other. I can't even bring myself to finish that thought. The assaults grew more constant, more vicious. They seemed to know exactly when they could get away with it. They knew Mom's routine better than she did, how on Tuesdays and Thursdays she'd drop off laundry and chat with neighbors into the late afternoon, how on Saturdays she'd go grocery shopping for at least a couple of hours. They also knew Dad would be away for days, sometimes weeks before his truck finally pulled back into the driveway. I started to fade away. The lively, talkative girl, I'd been turned into a shell. I stopped eating properly. My clothes hung on me like rags. Dark circles bloomed beneath my eyes. My grades plummeted too. I, who had always been a straight A student, started missing classes, failing tests. "What's going on with you, Annie?" my teacher asked one morning. "You've always been one of my best." I wanted so badly to tell her the truth right then and there. But Max's voice echoed in my mind. "No one will ever believe you." And after a while, even I began to question it. Had I somehow invited it? Was it my fault those doubts clawed at me every single day? At home, I started dressing in the baggiest, ugliest clothes I could find, trying to disappear into the wallpaper. I chopped off my hair, stopped smiling, did everything I could to make myself invisible. But it never stopped. Things only spiraled downward. One day, after an especially brutal assault, Max pinned my arms while Ray loomed over me. "If you tell Dad when he gets back," Ray hissed, "we'll tell him you were the one who started it, that you've been hanging around boys at school acting like a tease." He leaned closer, his voice dripping with malice. "Who do you think he'll believe? His 2 sons, or the girl who's been acting all weird?" Their words were sharpened knives, perfectly aimed. They knew exactly what to say, to keep me quiet, to make me believe it was all my fault. They even began twisting stories to poison my mother against me. "Annie has been getting too friendly with boys," Ray would say at the dinner table. I saw her chatting with some older kid at the corner. My mother would look at me, her brow creased with worry. "Is that true, honey?" she'd ask. "No, Mom," I swear I'd protest, but Max would jump in. "It's true." We both saw it. Little by little, they chipped away at the trust between me and my mother. She watched me constantly, but not in the way I needed. She was on the lookout for any sign that I might be encouraging them, that I might be the problem. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of my father coming home. When he was around, they wouldn't dare. He'd always been my protector, my hero. If he only knew, but how could I tell him? How could I make him believe me? Months passed, and my body began to betray me. I started bleeding when I wasn't supposed to. Cramps that felt like my insides were being ripped apart made me pass out sometimes. Fevers came and went with no explanation. One night, after Ray and Max had both had their way with me, I started bleeding heavily. It wasn't just my period, it was something worse. I hurt so badly that I passed out in the bathroom. When I came to, I was lying on the floor surrounded by smears of blood, too weak to even cry. Max found me like that. Panic lit up his face. "Ray, get in here," he shouted. "I think we went too far this time." They carried me to bed, wiped the bathroom clean, changed my clothes like I was a broken doll. Their fear was palpable. "If anyone finds out we're finished," Ray growled, "we'll say she fell down the stairs out back." They left me there, still bleeding but weaker now, the pain making it hard to even whimper. All I could do was close my eyes and pray for God to take me away from this hell. That night, by a stroke of luck, I still thank God for my father came home early from his haul. He wasn't supposed to be back until the next day, but he managed to wrap up his route ahead of schedule. I can still see him stepping into my room in the dark, wanting to kiss me goodnight like he always did when he came home from a trip. I remember the lights snapping on as he realized something was wrong. "Annie, sweetheart, wake up," he called softly, shaking me gently. His hand brushed the blood-soaked sheet. "Oh Lord, what happened here, Connie? Get in here now." I fought to open my eyes, and I saw my father, my protector, his face twisted with horror and tears. I tried to smile, tried to tell him how glad I was that he'd come home, but all I could whisper was, "Dad, help me." And then I slipped away into darkness. The panic in his voice, calling for my mother, the chaos that erupted in our house, the frantic drive to the hospital, all of it blurs together in my memory now. But one thing is clear as day, the look in my brother's eyes when my father carried me out of the house in his arms, a look of pure terror. They weren't afraid for my health. They were terrified of what came next. They knew this time there was no way to cover it up. When I got to St. Helena Medical Center, I was barely hanging on. My blood pressure was dangerously low. I'd lost so much blood. The doctors' voices sounded like they were coming from a far-off place, words I couldn't quite grasp. But one phrase carved itself into my memory forever. "This young girl has suffered repeated and violent sexual assault. We need to notify the authorities immediately." The ER became a whirlwind. My dad, usually so calm, started yelling, knocking over chairs. It took 3 nurses to restrain him. I had never seen him so out of control. "Who did this to my daughter? Who?" He roared, his voice cracking like it was breaking his heart in two. My mom stood in a corner crying, rocking like a scared little girl. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in one night. As the doctors worked to stabilize me, a woman with a gentle face and a soft voice entered the room. "Annie, my name is Margaret," she said, taking my hand. "I'm here to help you. Can you tell me who did this?" I tried to speak, but nothing came out. I glanced at my father, leaning against the wall, destroyed by grief. I looked at my mother, her face etched with disbelief. How could I tell the truth? How could I shatter what little was left of our family? It was some guys, I whispered, on the way back from school. I didn't know them. They were from out of town. That was my first lie, the first of so many I would tell in the months to come. Lies to shield those who didn't deserve it. Lies that would eat at me like acid. I stayed in the hospital for a week. I needed emergency surgery. The doctors told my parents the damage was so severe, I nearly lost my uterus at 13. They warned I might never be able to have children. Not once during that week did I see my brothers. My parents took turns at my side day and night. My dad held my hand while I slept, and when I opened my eyes, he was there, dark circles under his eyes, his beard unshaven. "I'm gonna find who did this to you, princess," he vowed, "even if I have to turn this whole town upside down." The police came again and again. They asked the same questions, and I gave the same vague answers. I couldn't describe their faces, didn't know where they came from. I couldn't remember anything. The officers exchanged skeptical glances. They knew I was hiding something. "Honey, you have to help us," an older detective urged me, his gray hair catching the harsh fluorescent light. "If you don't tell the truth, these men could hurt other girls." That thought gnawed at me, knowing that Ray and Max could do this to someone else. But how could I bring myself to destroy my family? How could I make my father lose not just his daughter, but also his 2 sons? The night before I was discharged, I had an unexpected visitor. My mother had gone home to shower, and Dad had run down to the cafeteria to grab something to eat. For nearly an hour, I was alone. The door creaked open, and Max stepped inside. My youngest brother, only 2 years older than me, looked like a ghost. Thin, pale, dark circles etched under his eyes. He looked like he'd aged years in just a week. My first instinct was to scream, but he raised his hands in surrender. "Annie, please," he stammered, tears streaming down his face. Tears I'd never seen from him before. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, really sorry. I stayed silent, staring at the boy who had played a part in my hell, now crumbling before me. Ray said if I didn't help, he'd beat me until I couldn't stand, that I wasn't a real man if I didn't. His voice cracked. I didn't want to. I swear to God I didn't. "Go away," I managed to say, "before Dad comes back. He's suspicious already. He's been asking where we were that day. He's talking to the neighbors. Ray's losing his mind." I didn't say another word. A part of me longed for my father to learn the truth, to see justice done. But another part knew it would destroy us all. "You didn't tell him anything, did you?" Max asked, his voice trembling with worry. "If you talk..." "Leave," I interrupted firmly. "I don't want to hear threats from you." "It's not a threat," he said, shifting closer to the door. "It's just, you know how Dad is. If he finds out, he'll kill us for real." And then he slipped out before I could answer. I stared at the closed door, tears streaming down my cheeks, because deep down I knew he was right. My dad, always so patient, so gentle, had a breaking point, and that breaking point was me. I came home on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Dad had cleaned and fixed up my room, bought a brand new comforter, even painted the walls a soft yellow, the color I'd always loved. "So you feel like you're in a brand new place," he explained. "A fresh start." He'd put a sturdy new lock on my door and solemnly handed me the key. "No one comes in here without your say-so," he promised. "No one." The first days back at home felt strange, like living in a house full of strangers. My brothers avoided me like I carried a disease. They left before dawn and came back after dark, never meeting my eyes. My mother pretended everything was normal, cooking my favorite meals, brushing my hair like she used to when I was little, trying to coax a smile from me, but something between us had shattered, something I wasn't sure could ever be put back together. "Sweetheart, you need to eat," she urged, watching me push the food around on my plate. "You need to get your strength back." How could I tell her that every bite felt like swallowing a stone, that I didn't feel hungry, didn't feel anything except a bottomless emptiness? Dad took time off from work. He said he wouldn't hit the road again until I was fully recovered and until the men who hurt me were caught. He spent his days at the police station, talking to detectives, handing out reward posters with the vague description I'd given of the so-called attackers. At night, he sat at the edge of my bed, holding my hand, until I drifted off. "Nothing bad's ever going to happen to you again, Princess," he promised. "Never again." But the damage had already been done, and it lived under the same roof. The nightmares started almost right away. I'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, reliving every second of that horror. Dad would come rushing in, wrapping me in his arms, trying to calm me down. Sometimes I'd be so shaken I had to take the pills the doctor gave me. "They're just dreams, honey," he'd say, wiping my tears. "They can't hurt you." But they weren't just dreams. They were memories. Memories that would follow me for the rest of my life. School wasn't any better. Nobody officially knew what had happened, but small towns have big mouths. By the time I went back to class a month later, the rumors had spread like wildfire. Look at her, kids would whisper in the hallway. "That's the girl who got attacked." They say it was some gang from out of town. Some people avoided me like I was contagious. Others looked at me with a pity so deep it made me feel sick. My friends didn't know what to say or how to act. I started spending every break alone, sitting under a tree in the courtyard, hiding from the stares and the whispers. My grades, which had already started slipping, tanked completely. The teachers tried to be patient, but I could see the disappointment in their eyes. Annie was such a promising student. I heard the principal whisper to my teacher as I walked past the office. "It's so sad. I wonder if she'll ever recover." At home, the air felt heavy with unspoken words. Dad became obsessed with finding the attackers, getting more and more frustrated every day that went by without an answer. Mom tried to keep the peace, tiptoeing around the house like any noise might shatter us all. Ray, the oldest, acted like nothing had ever happened. Sometimes he even pretended to be the caring big brother, asking if I needed help with homework or wanted to watch TV with him. "I'm worried about you, sis," he'd say, his voice dripping with fake concern. "We gotta stick together, get through this as a family." Max. The younger one kept his distance too. He spent most of his time at the auto shop, where he'd picked up a part-time job, only coming home to sleep. At dinner, he wouldn't even look at me, just stared at his plate silent. Max, though, he was different. He looked as broken as I felt, skinny, pale, dark shadows under his eyes. He'd flinch if anyone touched him unexpectedly. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me from the hallway, his eyes filled with guilt and fear. One night, about 3 months after I got out of the hospital, I heard shouting from my parents' bedroom. Dad's voice, usually so calm, shook the whole house. "Something's not right about this whole thing, Connie," he yelled. "Don't you see it? The boys are acting strange. What are you saying, Robert?" My mother's voice trembled. "For heaven's sake, they're your sons, and she's my daughter too," Dad roared. "Look at her, Connie. Look at what they've done to her. She doesn't eat. She doesn't sleep. She doesn't smile. Those eyes aren't the eyes of a child anymore." That was the work of those thugs, the ones nobody saw, the ones nobody knows, who left no trail in Fairview, where everybody knows everybody. My dad spat. I held my breath. Dad was starting to put the pieces together, his father's instincts tearing through my lies. Max nearly passed out when I asked him where he was that afternoon, Dad continued. "Ray can't even look me in the eye. He's defensive, always on edge. Connie, none of this adds up." "You're imagining things," Mom insisted, but I heard the doubt in her voice. "You're exhausted, that's all. It's the stress. I'll find the truth." Dad declared, his voice steady, but full of pain, one way or another. I closed my door and cried until sleep finally claimed me. The truth was barreling toward us like a summer storm, and when it hit, it would tear apart everything in its path. It was a Tuesday in June 1966, almost 4 months after my stay at the hospital. That day started like so many others in our new uneasy routine. My dad left early, heading to the sheriff's office, like he did nearly every morning now. My mom was out in the backyard, hanging laundry on the line. I sat in the living room, struggling to make sense of a math assignment I could barely focus on. Ray came in so quietly I didn't even hear him. By the time I looked up, he was already sitting next to me on the couch. My whole body went rigid with fear. "We need to talk, Annie." He began using that fake, gentle tone he'd perfected over the past few months. "This can't go on like this." I stood up right away, ready to run, but he grabbed my arm. "Relax, I'm not gonna hurt you," he said, though the strength in his grip told another story. "I just need you to understand something." Dad's starting to sniff around. Yesterday, he grilled Max, and that kid nearly spilled everything. "If that happens, we're all done for. Is that what you want?" I met his eyes that used to belong to my big brother, but now looked like a stranger's, and I found a piece of courage I didn't know I had. "Let go of my arm," I said. My teeth clenched. "Don't you ever touch me again." He looked shocked, like he hadn't expected me to fight back. Slowly, he loosened his grip. "You don't get it, do you?" he hissed. If you tell the truth, Dad's gonna kill us. Do you want that on your conscience? Did you think about my life when you did what you did? I shot back, tears streaming down my face. Why should I think about yours now? Ray's face turned crimson with rage. He stood towering over me. You'd better keep your mouth shut, he snarled, stepping closer. Or I swear. He didn't get to finish. The living room door burst open so hard it smacked the wall. My father stood there, a folder of papers clutched in one hand, his face pale and drawn. Step away from my daughter, he said, in a voice I'd never heard before, low measured but crackling with fury. Ray staggered back, his hands up. Dad, you've got it all wrong. My father threw the folder onto the coffee table, papers scattering across the floor. I recognized the hospital's letterhead. I just came from the hospital, my dad said, that same terrifying calm in his voice. I went to pick up copies of Annie's medical records. I was going to send them to a specialist in Philadelphia. He picked up one of the pages, holding it like it was something foul. Do you know what it says here, Ray? The doctor documented her injuries in detail, every detail. And you know what else? Those injuries weren't from one attack. They were consistent with repeated abuse over a long period. He turned to me, his eyes brimming with tears. Why didn't you tell me the truth, baby? Why did you protect the ones who did this to you? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Every word was trapped in my throat by months of fear and shame. Dad, she's confused. Ray jumped in. Even the doctor said trauma can mess with your head. Shut up, Dad roared, finally losing control. I heard enough when I walked in. You'd better keep your mouth shut. What is she supposed to keep secret, Ray? What? Just then, the kitchen door banged open and Max stepped in. He froze in the doorway, looking like a deer caught in headlights. Perfect timing, Max, Dad said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I was just about to call for you. Max looked at me, then at Ray, then at the papers on the floor. He knew. Dad, he started, but my father cut him off with a raised hand. Go get your mother, he ordered, and bring Max in here too. I want everyone in this room in 5 minutes. Max hesitated like he might run, but the look on Dad's face made him obey. He headed out toward the yard, calling for Mom. Dad turned to me and held my hands tight. Annie, sweetheart, I need you to be brave now. I need you to tell me the truth. The whole truth, no matter how much it hurts. I looked at Ray, who glared at me with hatred so sharp it could cut. I glanced toward the door where Max had disappeared. I thought of Max's haunted eyes, of the way he'd cowered under Dad's questions. It was them, Dad, I finally whispered, barely audible. It was my brothers. My father shut his eyes like he'd been struck. When he opened them again, he was a different man. How long, he asked, his voice rough. Since March, I said, my voice cracking. That trip you took to Ohio. 3 months. 3 months, he murmured, staring into nothing. My God. Mom rushed into the living room, her face pinched with worry. Max followed, pale as death. Robert, what is going on? She asked, glancing around at the mess in the living room. Where's Max, Dad demanded, ignoring her question. I don't know, Max stammered. He's not in his room or outside. It doesn't matter, Dad said, standing tall. Annie just told me who really hurt her. My mother clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Deep down, maybe she'd always suspected the truth. That's not true, Ray barked, trying to keep his voice steady. She's confused, traumatized. She's making all this up. No, it is true, I said, finding a strength I never knew I had. Both of you, every time Mom left since March. My mother collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Max leaned against the wall like his legs were giving out. Ray remained standing, but the color had drained from his face. What happened next felt like an explosion in slow motion. My father, always calm, always controlled, turned into a force of nature. He lunged at Ray with a roar that came from somewhere deep inside. The first punch landed square in Ray's jaw, knocking him into the bookshelf. "Robert, stop," my mother cried, scrambling to her feet. But it was too late. Years of bottled-up rage, months of helplessness, the crushing weight of betrayal, everything came boiling out at once. Dad grabbed Ray by the collar and kept swinging, yelling things I'd never imagined hearing from him. Max tried to intervene, grabbing Dad's arm, but ended up getting knocked to the ground. My mother was screaming. I was screaming. The living room had turned into a war zone. When the neighbors finally came, drawn by the chaos, they found my father being held back by 3 men. Ray bleeding on the carpet, Max slumped against the wall with a busted lip, and my mother clutching me in the corner. "He's lost his mind," someone muttered. "Call the sheriff." Within minutes, police cars lined the street. Officers stormed the house, pulling everyone apart. One of them, a man who'd known my dad from his frequent visits to the station, tried to calm him. "Robert, for God's sake, what happened here?" Then my father choked out rage and sorrow tangling in his throat. My own sons, but he couldn't finish. It was me who spoke. With a clarity that surprised even myself, I told the officers everything. Every detail, every threat, every moment of terror. It was like a dam had broken, and all the pain came pouring out. The police listened grimly, their faces hardening with each word. When I finished, one of them turned to Ray and Max. "You're both under arrest," he said. "Was Max part of it too?" A younger cop asked. "Yes," I said, tears streaming down my face. "But they forced him. Ray threatened him." As if on cue, Max appeared in the doorway, his face pale and streaked with tears. "It's true," he whispered. "I was part of it. I deserve to be arrested too." My father, who was being tended to by a paramedic, turned his head to Max with a look that was part pity, part disgust. "You're not my son anymore," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Neither of you are." Ray and Max were led out of the house. Ray was cuffed. Max wasn't, but both were arrested. Before getting into the patrol car, Max turned and looked at me one last time. "Forgive me, Annie," he said, his voice so low I almost didn't catch it. "I know I don't deserve it, but please forgive me." I couldn't speak. There was nothing left inside me except an aching emptiness. In the weeks that followed, our family was the talk of the town. Local papers ran screaming headlines: brothers arrested for abuse, father snaps after shocking discovery, family torn apart by tragedy. The trial moved fast by small-town standards. My testimony, the doctor's report, and Max's confession sealed the case. Ray got 12 years, Max since he was a minor, and Confess got 6 years in juvenile detention. My father was never the same. The warm, smiling man I'd known vanished that June afternoon. What remained was a broken shell, a man racked by guilt and anger. He couldn't look at me without tears. "I should have seen it," he'd mutter over and over. "I should have stayed home more, should have watched you closer. I failed you, princess." My mother sank into a deep depression. She stayed in bed for days at a time, refusing to eat or talk. When she finally began to get up again, she looked like she'd aged 20 years. Her hair turned white almost overnight. "How didn't I see it?" she'd sob. How does a mother not see that our home, once full of laughter and life, became a mausoleum? My brothers' rooms were locked, their belongings boxed up in the attic. Their names became like a curse, never spoken aloud again. School became a nightmare. Everyone knew. Some kids watched me like I was a freak show. Others stared with sick pity. I couldn't walk the halls without hearing the whispers. That's her, they'd murmur. The one whose brothers I couldn't stand it. After 2 weeks of trying to bear those looks, I begged my parents to let me transfer. But Dad had another plan. We're leaving, he said one night at dinner, his voice like stone. There's nothing here but pain. We'll find a new start. And so in August 1966, we left Riverdale. Dad got a transfer with his trucking company, and we moved to New Hope, almost 250 miles away, a place where no one knew our names or what had happened. We left behind the house, the furniture, the photos, everything that tied us to that nightmare. But as I learned the hard way, no matter how far you run, some scars come with you like shadows that never leave. Those first months in New Hope felt like living in a fragile bubble. I'd grown up in a flat town, but now we were surrounded by rolling hills, old colonial buildings, and a mist that settled in the mornings like a shroud. It felt like we'd stumbled into another world, another century. We started over in August 1966. I had just turned 14. My dad landed a steady job at the local transportation office. No more long hauls, no more weeks away. For the first time, in as long as I could remember, he'd be home every night. My mom found a small job at a bakery down the street, baking pastries and cookies. It wasn't the same as her seamstress work, but it kept her busy, gave her something to do besides sink into her thoughts. They enrolled me in St. Mary's Academy, a Catholic school a few blocks from home. There no one knew my story. To them, I was just another new girl. Quiet, a little sad maybe, but just a teenager, adjusting to a new town. We have a chance to start fresh, Princess, Dad would say, as we strolled the tree-lined streets on weekends. Nobody here knows us, knows what we've been through. But I knew. My body knew. My mind knew. The scars hadn't faded, some visible, others hidden deep inside. The nightmares didn't care that we'd left Riverdale behind. Almost every night, I'd jolt awake, cold sweat soaking my sheets, phantom hands clawing at me. Dad would rush in, gather me up in his arms, rock me like a baby, until the shaking stopped. Sometimes he'd stay by my bed the whole night. "It'll get better, honey," he'd whisper, smoothing my hair. "With time, it'll pass." But it didn't. If anything, the nightmares grew more twisted. Some nights I dreamed that Ray and Max had broken out of prison and found me here in New Hope. I'd wake up gasping, feeling invisible hands around my throat. Mom and Dad took me to a doctor who prescribed sleeping pills, but the pills didn't make the dreams stop. They just trapped me in them, made it harder to wake up. After a few weeks of even darker nights, I stopped taking them. At St. Mary's, I tried to blend in. The nuns were strict, but fair. The other girls were curious about the girl who transferred in the middle of the year. But I built walls around myself, silent, tall, impenetrable. "You never talk about your old town," a girl named Teresa said one day at lunch. "Don't you miss it?" "No," I said flatly. "I don't miss anything about it. What about your friends?" "Your family," she pressed. "I don't want to talk about it," I said. After that, they stopped trying. I became the odd one out, the loner, the girl with no friends, and that was fine by me. Friends meant trust, and I didn't know how to trust anymore. At home, my parents tried to patch together some version of normal. Mom decorated our small apartment with flowers and bright curtains and knickknacks from the local market. Dad brought home books, chocolates, anything to try to make me smile. But there was a ghost between us, or maybe two ghosts. We never talked about Ray and Max. Their names were like curses that would poison the air. But their absence hovered over us like a storm cloud. At night, I'd hear Mom crying in her room. Dad would try to comfort her. But how do you comfort a mother who lost both her sons to prison and learned that they'd been monsters? How do you ease the guilt of a father who failed to protect his only daughter? I should have seen it, Robert, she'd sob. How does a mother miss something like that? It's not your fault, Connie, Dad would reply, his voice as tired as his eyes. They fooled us all. 6 months after we'd moved to New Hope, a letter arrived from the State Juvenile Detention Center. It was from Max. Dad was furious, wanted to burn it before even opening it. Mom begged him to let her read it. I just stood there, frozen, staring at that envelope, like it might explode. It's addressed to Annie, Mom said, showing me my name scrawled across the front. She has the right to decide. Dad turned to me, his eyes full of hurt and anger. You don't have to read this, honey, he said, his voice rough. You don't owe them anything. I took the envelope in my trembling hands. I didn't know what I wanted. Part of me wanted to shred it into a million pieces. Another part wanted to hear what he had to say. I'll think about it, I said, slipping it into my pocket. I don't know yet. I carried that letter everywhere in my room, in my backpack at school, even on my walks around town. Sometimes I forgot it was there. Other times it felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. What could Max possibly say that would change anything? What words could heal what he and Ray had broken? One Sunday afternoon, while Mom and Dad were at Mass, I finally found the courage. I opened the envelope like it might contain something dangerous. The handwriting was small and shaky, filling 4 pages. My heart pounded as I started to read. Dear Annie, it began. I don't even know where to begin. Maybe with this, I don't expect your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. What we did to you was inexcusable. Every day in this place, I wake up with the same question. How could I do something so awful to my own sister? I won't make excuses. I won't blame it all on Ray, even though he threatened me. I had a choice. I could have said no. I could have told Mom or Dad or someone. I could have protected you like a brother should. But instead, I hurt you. I became part of your nightmare. They have me in therapy here. The counselor says I have to understand why I did what I did to make sure I never do it again. He says I might have a chance at a life when I get out. But first, I have to own the pain I caused. And I do, Annie. I see it every day. Every time I think of what you went through because of me, I carry that weight like a chain I can't shake. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not asking you to let me back into your life. I just wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry, and that if I could go back and change it, I would. If one day, far in the future, you feel like giving me a chance to apologize in person, I'll be here. But I understand if that day never comes. I just hope you're finding a way to heal, to move forward. I hope one day you find peace with all my remorse, Max. When I finished reading, I found tears rolling down my face. They weren't tears of sadness or anger, more like a messy mix of emotions. I couldn't even name a storm that left me completely drained. I tucked the letter away in a drawer, never replied, but couldn't bring myself to destroy it either. Somehow those words on paper were proof that what I'd lived through was real, that I wasn't imagining it, that I wasn't losing my mind. The months rolled on and blurred into years. I learned to navigate life in New Hope to the slower rhythm of that small historic town. At school, I kept mostly to myself, but over time, a few classmates managed to break through my walls. They never became close friends, but they were kind enough. One of them, Martha, the pharmacist's daughter, was the first person I trusted with even a piece of my story. I didn't tell her everything, of course, just that I'd been through something hard in our old town, and that's why we'd moved. It must have been awful, she said softly, not prying for details. It was, I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty, but I'm trying to move forward. If you ever need someone to listen, I'm here, she offered. So simply, it almost broke my heart. It was the first time someone had offered to help without drowning in curiosity or peppering me with questions. Just being there, willing to listen if I wanted to talk. At home, things began to mend piece by piece. The nightmares didn't vanish, but they came less often. My mother stopped crying every night and even started smiling sometimes, especially when she brought home funny stories from the bakery where she worked. My dad stayed protective, always wanting to know where I was calling the school if I was even 10 minutes late. But even that began to soften as he saw I was somehow surviving. In 1968, 2 years after we'd moved, something unexpected arrived in the mail, a letter from the state prison. From Ray. Unlike Max's, his letter was cold, almost blunt. "Annie," it began, "I know you'll probably tear this up without reading it. I know you hate me, and you're right. What we did to you has no excuse. I'm writing because I heard Max sent you a letter. He's playing the remorseful one, the good guy. Don't believe it. He was part of everything just as much as me. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm paying for what I did. In here, everyone knows what I'm in for, and it's hell. Even the worst of the worst hate guys like me. Maybe that gives you some comfort knowing we're suffering. I hope it does. Ray." This time I didn't hesitate. I ripped that letter into pieces and threw it in the trash. I didn't tell my parents I'd gotten it. I couldn't bear to see that look in their eyes again. Ray's words stuck with me not because I felt pity or guilt, but because they confirmed something I'd always suspected. Max hadn't just been a victim of circumstance. He'd made a choice. He'd chosen to be part of it. A few weeks later, a third letter arrived, this time from Max. I didn't even open it. I dropped it straight into the fireplace, watching the flames eat the paper, wishing they could burn the memories too. In 1970, when I turned 18, another fear took hold of me. Max had served his time and would be released. He didn't know where we'd moved, but if he wanted to find me, he could. The thought of seeing him again, even by accident, made me sick. Do we have to move again? I asked my parents at dinner one night, what if he comes looking for us? My dad, who didn't know about the letters, looked startled by my question. He doesn't know where we are, Princess, he said gently. And even if he did, I'd never let him near you. But you can't be with me every minute, I argued. What if I run into him at the store or at school? My mom, quiet through most of the meal, finally spoke. Maybe it's time to face it, honey, she said, her voice steady. We can't keep running. I stared at her, stunned. This was the same mother who'd spent months locked in her room after learning what they'd done, and now she was talking about facing it. What do you mean, Mom? I mean, life doesn't stop, she said. Max served his time. You're growing up. You'll be going to college soon. We can't let fear rule us forever. My dad looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Are you saying we should just forgive that monster? No, she said, her voice firm. I'll never forgive what they did. But Max was the youngest. He was under Ray's influence. Maybe what? Dad interrupted, his voice rising. Maybe we invite him over for dinner, act like nothing happened, Robert. That's not what I'm saying, and you know it. Mom shot back, tears in her eyes. I just think that living in constant hate and fear isn't helping us. Look at us. We pretend we're a normal family, but we're still stuck in that living room that day. It was the first time I'd heard them argue like that since everything fell apart. It felt like a dam breaking, years of pain flooding the room. Would you give up your son? Mom cried. Would you never see Max again, not even to hear what he has to say? He's not my son anymore, Dad said quietly. But the fight had gone out of his voice. Neither of them are. I sat there listening to them, something shifting inside me. It wasn't forgiveness, no, I'd never forgive, but maybe it was acceptance. The understanding that what happened was part of my story, and no matter how far we ran, we couldn't outrun it. I don't want to see Max, I said, cutting through their argument. I'm not ready. Maybe I never will be. But I'm done running. They both turned to me, surprised at the strength in my voice. For the first time, I was deciding for myself, not just following their lead. I'm scared, I admitted, but I don't want that fear to control my life anymore. My dad stood up and hugged me tight, just like when I was a kid. You're the bravest person I know, Princess, he said, his voice breaking. So much braver than me. That night was a turning point for our family. It wasn't some magical fix. The scars were still there. The nightmares still found me sometimes. The memories still showed up at the worst times. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time since everything happened, I felt like maybe my past didn't have to be my whole story. In 1971, I got accepted to the College of Education in Philadelphia. It meant moving away, living in a dorm, starting my own life. My parents were proud, but I could see the fear in their eyes too. Are you sure you're ready, honey? My mom asked as she helped me pack. Philly's a big city. It can be dangerous. I'm ready, Mom, I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. I can't let fear keep me from living. That night before I left, I had a different kind of dream. It wasn't one of those awful nightmares that had tormented me for years. It was a dream of freedom. I saw myself running in a wide-open field under a sky so blue it felt like hope itself, with nothing chasing me, no one holding me back. When I woke up, I was crying, but for the first time, they were tears of possibility. Philadelphia in 1971 was a whole different world from New Hope. Skyscrapers replaced colonial houses. Wide avenues stretched where cobblestone streets used to wind. Crowds of strangers filled the sidewalks instead of familiar faces. Those first days in the dorms, the old fear followed me like a shadow. But there was something else now, too. Something strong, something determined I hadn't known I had. The dorm was in University City, buzzing with young people and energy. I shared a 3-bedroom apartment with 5 other girls. They were loud, full of plans and laughter, so different from me and my hidden scars. Annie, you're always so quiet, Christina, my roommate from Pittsburgh who was studying law, said one evening. You need to get out more, live a little. Little by little, I started to open up, not about my past that was a secret I kept locked up, but about the things I liked, my opinions, my hopes for the future. I found out I loved music, especially Simon and Garfunkel, who were everywhere that year. I discovered I had a knack for drawing and that I loved working with kids. You're going to be an amazing teacher, Christina said one afternoon after she saw me helping the neighbor's kid with her homework. You've got patience and you care, that's what kids need. The College of Education opened windows I hadn't even known were there. I learned about child development psychology, different teaching methods. Every class felt like a doorway to a new world, a world where maybe I could make a difference for some child out there. One day in educational psychology, the professor said trauma can leave deep marks on a child's emotional growth. But with the right support, human resilience is extraordinary. That word resilience stuck with me. The idea that even after the worst storms, something could grow again. That was what I'd been doing all along, without even realizing it. My parents called every week, worried and missing me. That first holiday break when I came home, I saw how much older they looked. My dad, once so strong, now carried a weight that bent his shoulders. My mom smiled more than she used to, but sometimes her eyes looked far away. Are you okay? I asked one night over dinner. "We're okay," Dad said, squeezing Mom's hand on the table. "We just miss you, Princess." That visit made me realize it wasn't just me who'd been stuck. My parents were still living in that terrible day in June 1966. It was like time had frozen for all of us. "You need to live too," I told them the night before I went back to Philly. "You can't spend your whole life waiting for me to visit, worrying about me." Dad gave me that sad smile that had become his trademark. "That's easier said than done, honey." "I know," I said, hugging him tight. "Believe me, I know." Back at school, I threw myself into my studies with a new kind of fire. I wasn't just building a future, I was proving to myself that you can survive the past, that even the deepest wounds can heal. In my second year, I met John. He was studying engineering at the university, living in a dorm near mine. We met at a friend's birthday party. He handed me a cup of punch, made a comment about the music, and we ended up talking for hours. John was different from the guys who tried to get close before. He didn't push, didn't brag, didn't make me feel like I owed him something. There was a calmness about him, a kindness that made me feel safe. "Can I call you sometime?" he asked, as the party wound down. I hesitated. Relationships weren't part of my plans. The idea of letting someone that close terrified me. "Just to talk," he added like he could sense my fear. "No pressure." I nodded, my heart pounding with fear, and something else I couldn't quite name. John called 3 days later, and then again and again. Our talks were easy: books, movies, classes, the future. He never asked about my past, never pushed me to share what I wasn't ready to give. On our first date, just the two of us, we went to the movies to see Love Story, which was a big hit at the time. When he tried to hold my hand in the dark, I flinched, pulling away like I'd touched a live wire. "Sorry," he whispered, not pressing it. "I won't do anything you don't want." Those words, so simple, so obvious, yet so powerful, echoed in my head for days. "I won't do anything you don't want." It was the first time someone had said that to me, the first time someone acknowledged that I had the right to set my own boundaries. Over the next few weeks, our friendship blossomed. John was patient, respectful, never pushing me past the lines I'd drawn. When I finally felt brave enough to slip my hand into his as we strolled through Fairmount Park, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. "There's something in your past that hurt you real bad, isn't there?" John asked one afternoon as we sat by the Schuylkill River. "You don't have to tell me. I just want you to know when you're ready. If you're ever ready, I'll be here to listen." Tears filled my eyes. How did he know? How did he understand me so well without needing me to explain every detail? "Thank you," was all I could manage. Our relationship moved at my pace. Every step I took felt like a small victory. Our first kiss months after we met. The first time I talked about my family, even if it was just the surface stuff. The day I introduced him to my parents during one of their visits to Philly. Dad, ever protective, gave him the once-over with suspicious eyes. But Mom, with her quiet intuition, saw right away that John was different. "He's got kind eyes," she told me later when we were alone. "Eyes of someone who respects." In 1974, during my last year of college, I got a letter that turned my world upside down. Ray and Max had both been granted early release for good behavior after serving just over half their sentences. The news came from my old lawyer in Riverdale, who felt I should know. "They don't know where you are," he reassured me, "and they're legally barred from contacting you." But the old fear came roaring back. What if they tried to find me? What if they wanted revenge for my testimony? For days I couldn't sleep, plagued by nightmares, seeing threats in every shadow. John noticed, but didn't push. He was just there, solid and steady, waiting. It was then that I made a decision that would change my life forever. I was tired of running, tired of letting fear dictate every choice I made. I needed to face my demons head on. I need to tell you something I said one night, sitting in the tiny apartment John had rented after graduation, about my past, about why I am the way I am. He took my hand, his eyes filled with that gentle understanding. Only if you want to, Annie. It doesn't have to be tonight, or ever if it's too hard. But I needed to. For the first time, I told him everything from that day in the kitchen in Riverdale, to Dad's discovery, to Ray and Max's arrest, to us leaving for New Hope. I talked and talked, the words pouring out like a flood that had been building for years. John held my hands, silent tears running down his cheeks as he listened. When I finally finished, too spent to move, he pulled me into his arms and held me so tenderly, I started crying all over again. "You're the strongest person I know," he said softly, "and I love you. Nothing you said changes that nothing." That night marked the real beginning of my healing. Sharing my story, my darkest truth, and being loved for who I was, not in spite of it, but because of it, felt like being set free. In the weeks that followed, with John by my side, I made another choice to face my brothers. Not in person, not yet, but through letters. I wrote 3 letters, one for each of them. To Max, I wrote about how his part in the abuse, no matter how young he was, or how much he said he'd been pressured, had shattered me. I told him how I'd spent years trying to understand how my own brother, the one I loved and trusted, could be part of something so terrible. "I don't hate you anymore," I wrote, "but I can't fully forgive you either. I hope you find peace, that you rebuild your life, and that you never hurt anyone like that again." To Ray, the ringleader, the one who had started it all, the words were the hardest to write. For days I stared at the blank page, the pen heavy in my hand. Finally I wrote, "You stole my childhood. You stole my innocence, my trust, my sense of safety. For years you controlled me through fear, but that ends now. I'm not afraid of you anymore. You have no power over me." I sent those letters all at once, not because I wanted an answer, because I didn't. It was my way of saying I was done living in their shadow. It was my declaration that I was free. From that moment on, I decided that I wouldn't let my identity be defined by what Ray and Max had done. I would define myself by the choices I made, the life I chose to live. In December of 1974, I graduated with my degree in education. My parents were in the audience that day, their faces glowing with pride, despite the years that had weighed on them. John was right there beside them, clapping louder than anyone as I crossed the stage to receive my diploma. 2 weeks later, he proposed. "I don't have much to offer except my love," he said, holding out a simple gold band. "But I promise to always respect you, to build a life where you feel safe and loved." I hesitated, not because I didn't love him. I loved John more deeply than I'd ever thought possible. But fear still held me back. Fear that I'd never be able to give him everything a wife should. Fear that the damage done to me ran too deep. What if I never can? I whispered, my voice small. What if the trauma is just too much? John smiled at me, that gentle smile that had made me trust him in the first place. "Annie, marriage is so much more than that," he said. "It's friendship. It's building a life together. Everything else will come in time, and if it doesn't, we'll still have each other." We got married in March of 1975 in a small church in New Hope. The day was bright and warm, the air filled with the scent of cherry blossoms. My father walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes. You deserve every bit of happiness in the world, Princess, he whispered. Every day, I thank God you survived and became the incredible woman you are. We started our married life in a tiny apartment in Philadelphia. John worked for a construction company, and I got a job teaching at an elementary school. We were young, in love, and filled with hope. Physical intimacy was hard as I'd feared. There were nights when memories returned like unwelcome ghosts, bringing tears and panic. But John never pressured me. He never made me feel like I was failing him. He simply held me, loving me in the way I could accept. In 1976, I found out I was pregnant. The news filled me with a wild mixture of joy and fear. Doctors had warned that the trauma I'd suffered might have left me unable to carry a child, and even now I wondered how I could protect a baby when I'd been so helpless once. "We'll figure it out together," John said, squeezing my hand as we stared at the ultrasound. Our daughter Mary was born in January of 1977, healthy and strong, with John's eyes, and people said my smile. Holding her for the first time felt like a miracle. So small, so perfect, so trusting of the world, not yet knowing the darkness it could hold. "I'll always protect you," I promised her, kissing her tiny forehead. Motherhood healed me in ways I'd never imagined. Watching Mary grow, looking to me for everything, showed me that I was strong, that I could protect, that I could love unconditionally. When Peter came along in 1980 and Anna in 1983, our family felt complete. My parents watched the grandchildren with a light in their eyes I thought I'd never see again. Dad especially came alive around them, telling stories, making them laugh, becoming the grandfather I always knew he could be. In 1985, I received a letter that made my heart pound. It was from Max. I left it on the kitchen table, for days unsure what to do. Finally, on a quiet Sunday with the kids playing in the yard and John reading the paper, I opened it. "Dear Annie," it began. "I got your letter years ago and took it to heart. I never expected a reply, and I'm not asking for one now. I just wanted you to know that your words changed me. They were hard, but they were fair. They made me see the harm I caused. I've worked to rebuild my life. I finished my education, got a steady job, and met a wonderful woman who knows about my past and still chose to be with me. I go to therapy and volunteer at a center for abused kids. I'm not asking to be part of your life. I know that's not possible. I just wanted you to know that your words mattered, that they didn't fall on deaf ears, and that I hope you found the peace and happiness you deserve. If you ever want to reach out, I'd be glad to hear from you, but I understand if you'd rather this be our last contact. With regret and sincere remorse, Max." I handed the letter to John, who read it without saying a word. "What do you want to do?" he finally asked, his voice gentle. I thought about it a long time. The wounded girl in me wanted to tear it to shreds, to pretend Max didn't exist. But the woman I'd become, a teacher, a wife, a mother, saw something beyond anger. "I think I'll write back," I said at last. Not to reconnect, not to forgive everything, but to show that I survived, that I built a life they couldn't break. My letter was short, just enough to let him know I had a family, that I'd become a teacher, that I was okay. I didn't send photos, didn't include an address. "I'm glad you found a way to make peace," I wrote. "That's all I can say for now." I never heard from Ray again. Years later, I heard through an old friend from Riverdale that Ray had died in a bar fight back in 1990, and that Max had moved out west, leaving no forwarding address. Max wrote to me once after that, thanking me for my earlier letter, saying he was married now and expecting his first child. I didn't reply this time, and he respected my silence. Life kept moving forward. My children grew up strong and safe, never burdened by the shadows of my past. My father passed away in 1992, peacefully knowing that I was okay. My mother followed him 2 years later, passing in her sleep as if she couldn't bear to be in this world without him. John and I grew old side by side, watching our children graduate, get married, and bring us grandchildren. The love that had started so cautiously between us deepened into something solid and unwavering. He never stopped being the patient man who respected my boundaries, who made me feel safe. In 2010, already a grandmother to 4, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I wrote to Max asking to see him. It wasn't for him, but for me to finally close that chapter of my life. We met at a small cafe in downtown Philadelphia. He looked so different. Gray hair, deep lines around his eyes, reading glasses perched on his nose. He didn't look anything like the teenager who had been part of my darkest days. We talked for almost 2 hours about our lives, our kids, our regrets. I never stopped being sorry, he said, staring down at his coffee. Not for one single day. I know I replied, surprised to feel no anger, just a quiet, distant sadness. And I hope you never do. It wasn't a meeting for forgiveness. There were no hugs, no promises to keep in touch. It was a meeting to finally close the book on that part of my life. As we stood to leave, he asked, "Were you able to find happiness?" Annie, despite everything I thought of John, of our children and grandchildren, of the life we'd built together. Yes, I said honestly, very happy, and that I realized was the greatest victory of all. I had refused to let those months of horror define my entire life. I had chosen hope, love, happiness, despite the scars. Now at 73, I look back on a life that wasn't easy, but was worth every step. I'm a grandmother to 7 amazing grandchildren, a retired teacher who taught and loved hundreds of children, a woman who learned that even the deepest wounds can heal if you give them time and care. To all of you who've stayed with me until now, thank you for listening to my story. If I'm sharing it today, after so many years of silence, it's because I believe it might help someone out there who's facing something similar, to remind them that there is hope, that there is life beyond pain. If you're in your own valley of shadows, remember this: you are stronger than you know. Healing can be slow and messy, but it is possible. Trust that. And before I say goodbye, I want to thank the 20,000 subscribers. That's an incredible milestone, my goodness. Don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to us, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single story. A big hug from Grandma Ann, and I'll see you in the next video.